It's 5:30 in the morning, and a 9-year-old boy is already awake. Not because anyone woke him, because the papers arrive at the corner at 6, rain or shine, and if he's not there, someone else's kid will be, and someone else's kid will get paid. He laces his boots in the dark. He doesn't complain. He doesn't ask if this is fair. In his house, in 1932, this is just what Tuesday looks like. Now think about the last time a 9-year-old in your life woke up before the sun for anything other than a video game. That's not a joke about kids today. It's a question about us, the adults who raise them or who are raising them right now. Somewhere between that boy on the corner and the kid asleep upstairs, something got traded. We traded real weight on small shoulders for comfort. We traded consequence for protection. And we told ourselves it was love. Today we're going back to the Depression years. Not to romanticize hardship, because hardship was never the gift. The gift was what hardship demanded of children. Real responsibility, real stakes, real trust that they could carry something that mattered. We're going to walk through 10 of those responsibilities one at a time, where they came from, what they cost, and what happened to them. And by the end, you're not going to feel guilty. You're going to feel something more useful. You're going to feel like maybe your kid, or the kid you used to be, was underestimated. Let's start with that boy on the corner. Before there were allowances, there were paper routes. And a paper route wasn't a chore. It was a job with a boss, a schedule, and real money changing hands. Picture him again. Canvas bag heavy on one shoulder, counting out papers by streetlight, folding them tight enough to throw onto a porch without breaking a window. He collects payment himself, door to door, once a week, and if a customer stiffs him, that's his loss, not his father's. By the early 1930s, newspaper delivery was one of the most common paying jobs a child in America could hold. Uniform child labor rules passed around 1930 explicitly allowed boys over the age of 9 to sell and deliver papers. Younger than almost any other paid were permitted at the time. Historical labor record from the era described newspaper carriers as one of the few acceptable categories of child labor precisely because families depended on that income and because the job taught something employers valued: reliability. Compare that to today. A child's first brush with earning is often a chore chart with stickers or an allowance handed over regardless of whether the trash actually got taken out. There's no customer to disappoint, no route to lose, no real money that came from real effort, in real weather, on a real deadline. If you want to hand a child something closer to that paper route today, start small but make it real. A task with an actual customer, a neighbor, a relative, where the payment depends on the job being done, not on being asked nicely enough times. Take a breath with me for a second, because the next one hits closer to home. In a lot of Depression-era households, there's a hidden job title that never showed up on any census form: second parent. Not a grown-up, a child. When both parents worked, or when a mother took in laundry or sewing just to keep the lights on, someone had to watch the baby. And often, that someone was 5 or 6 years old themselves, handed a younger sibling, told where the diapers were, and trusted not to let anything happen. Accounts from the era described children barely old enough for school, already responsible for feeding, dressing, and soothing brothers and sisters for hours at a stretch, every single day, without it ever being treated as unusual. This wasn't neglect. It was math. If mom couldn't work, the family didn't eat. If the older kids couldn't cover for her, she couldn't work. Everyone in the house was a load-bearing wall. Now sit with the contrast for a second. Today, we hesitate to leave a 10-year-old home alone for an hour, and there are entire online debates about whether that counts as endangerment. A Depression-era 6-year-old was already someone's safety net. We're not saying go back to that. We're saying somewhere in between 6-year-old raising a baby and can't be trusted alone with a sandwich, there's a version of trust worth finding again. Start by giving a child in your life one piece of real care to be responsible for: a pet, a plant, a younger cousin for 20 supervised minutes, where the outcome actually depends on them showing up. I need a second here too, because the next one is the one that changed how I think about my own childhood. Some of what built that trust didn't happen in a house at all. It happened outside, in the dirt before breakfast. By 1933, roughly a third of American farmers had lost their land, which meant that for the families still holding on, Every remaining acre had to earn its keep, and every set of hands, no matter how small, had to help it. A child on a family farm in the 1930s didn't have a chore chart. They had a section of the garden that was theirs to weed, animals that were theirs to feed before school, water that was theirs to haul. Photographs from the period show children as young as 6 or 7 standing in family portraits taken specifically because they were now officially workers, not helpers, workers with tasks that mattered to whether the family ate that winter. Families leaned on each other the same way. Neighbors traded labor for a barn raising. Children pitched in on someone else's harvest, knowing their own family would get the same help back. Responsibility wasn't just inside the house. It was the whole community's insurance policy. Compare that to the modern suburban yard, where a child's job is often optional, negotiable, and disconnected from any real outcome. Do it and get a reward, skip it, and at most, get nagged. Nothing depends on it. Nobody eats less if it doesn't get done. If you want a taste of that old logic, give a child one outdoor task with a visible, real consequence. A garden bed only they water, and if they forget, they get to watch it actually wilt. Let the plant teach the lesson instead of you. Here's the number that reframes everything you think you know about childhood. In the years right before the Depression, the United States government was signing official papers that pulled 14 and 15-year-olds out of school and put them into full-time work. Not summer jobs, not a few hours after class. Full-time employment certificates, legal documents that ended a child's education and started their working life. According to reports gathered from 60 cities across 33 states, around 220,000 of those full-time certificates were issued to children age 14 to 18 in 1929 alone. The year before, it had been about 150,000. In one single year around 1930, the state of New York handed out more than 72,000 of them to children under the age of 16. Sit with the physical reality of that. A 14-year-old walks into an office with a parent, signs a form, and by the end of the week is standing at a machine or behind a counter for 10 hours a day, handing their wages to their mother because the rent is due Friday. That was not a tragedy that happened to a few unlucky kids in the corner of the country. That was a national number, measured in the hundreds of thousands, written down in government ledgers. And here's the part that should stop you cold. Those certificates only counted the children the government bothered to track. The census that produced these figures deliberately excluded kids working on family farms and kids doing domestic labor, the paper routes, the sibling raising, the garden plots, the household cooking we've already walked through. Every child we've talked about so far was invisible to these numbers. So the real count of American children carrying adult-sized weight wasn't in the hundreds of thousands. It was in the millions, most of them never written down anywhere at all. So when we picture a child in 1930, the whole frame has to shift. 14 wasn't almost old enough to babysit the neighbors. 14 was old enough to leave school and help keep a family from going under. 10 was old enough to be counted, in earlier censuses, as a gainful worker. These weren't children who happened to do a few grown-up things. They were children the entire society assumed were capable of real contribution, and who, overwhelmingly, rose to meet that assumption. Now, look at where we've quietly drawn the line today. In much of modern life, a 14-year-old is someone to be scheduled, driven, fed, and entertained, a dependent whose primary job is to be managed and kept comfortable. We didn't just shrink the expectation of contribution. We came close to erasing it, and then we told ourselves the erasure was a kindness. I'm not sharing that number to argue we should send teenagers back to the factory floor. Those child labor laws were passed for real and necessary reasons. Children were maimed, exhausted, robbed of school and health and childhood itself, and their protection was a genuine moral victory that should never be undone. The factory is not the point. The expectation is the point. A 14-year-old in 1930 was assumed, by everyone around them, to be capable of carrying something that mattered. So the honest question isn't should kids work. It's this: when was the last time we assumed a 14-year-old could carry anything real at all? Let that question breathe for a moment, because the next habit is quieter than a factory whistle, but lived in every single house, rich or poor, in every corner of the country. There's a difference between a chore and a task that actually matters, and Depression-era children live their whole lives on the far side of that line. Today, a chore is very often a lesson wearing a costume. We invent the job so the child can learn responsibility, but we all quietly know that if they skip it, the house runs exactly the same. The trash gets taken out eventually. The dishes get done by someone. The lesson is the only real product. The work itself is optional. In the 1930s, there was no costume because there was no slack. When a child was sent to haul water, the family needed that water to cook and wash. When a child was told to dry and put away every single piece of silverware, or keep the stove fed, or wring out and hang the wash, that labor was load-bearing. Pull it out and something in the household actually stopped working. Account from the era describe girls running a household's cooking, baking, and food preservation before they were even teenagers. Not as an enrichment activity, not for sticker, because someone had to, and because they'd been started young and taught to do it right. The dignity was in the realness. A child who genuinely kept part of a household running knew it in their bones. And that knowledge hardened into a quiet competence you simply cannot hand a kid through praise. You can only give it to them through trust and through the honest weight of consequence when they drop it. The modern version has been hollowed out from the inside. We kept the word chore, but drained every drop of stakes out of it, and then we stood around genuinely puzzled that it doesn't seem to build the same backbone our grandparents had. The good news is you can put the stakes back without a shred of hardship. Give a child one task the household truly relies on, a meal they are genuinely in charge of once a week, not helping in the kitchen but actually owning it start to finish, and then the hard part, don't rescue it. Let it be there's to get right, and there's to get wrong. A child in the 1930s didn't just earn money. A child in the 1930s handled money, counted it, carried it, decided about it, lost it, and felt in their own body the weight of getting it wrong. Picture a 10-year-old sent alone to the market with a scrap of paper and exact change knotted into a handkerchief, because there was no margin for a mistake and no second trip if a coin rolled into a storm drain on the way. That child had to add the list in their head, hand over the right amount, count the change back, and carry the groceries home without losing a nickel. And everyone in the family understood that the arithmetic was real, that a wrong number meant something on the dinner table would simply not be there. Picture the paper boy from our very first item, home from his route, sorting coins into piles on the kitchen table under a single bulb, subtracting what he owed the distributor from what he'd collected, learning in his own cold fingers the exact difference between money that comes in and money a household actually needs to survive. That handling started young, and it started concrete. Accounts from the era describe families surviving by layering tiny income streams on top of one another. A few eggs sold here, laundry taken in there, a child's handful of earned coins folded quietly into the household total. And a child old enough to add to that pile was old enough to understand precisely where every cent of it went, and why there was never quite enough. There was no invisible tap of a card, no number that refilled itself on a screen, no adult murmuring, "Don't worry about it." There were coins on a table, a family that needed them, and a child who could feel the whole grim math of the month in the palm of their hand. That is the piece we have most completely lost, and we lost it by accident, in the name of convenience. Today, a child encounters money as an abstraction, a figure glowing on a screen, a card that never visibly empties, a tap that makes the toys simply appear at the door 2 days later. Enormous numbers of children now reach the edge of adulthood, having never once held the full weight of a real financial decision in their own 2 hands, never watched an actual dollar leave, and understood, in their gut, what it cost someone to earn it. We told ourselves we were protecting them from money worries. What we actually did was delay the entire education until the day the stakes turn into rent and credit and debt that doesn't forgive a beginner. You can hand a child that old competence back without a single day of hardship. Give them real cash for a real completed job. Then step back and let them make real choices with it, including the freedom to spend it foolishly once and feel the sting. A lesson that costs $5 at age 10 is the cheapest tuition they will ever pay against the very same lesson at 25. Give me one more breath before the next one, because this is the habit that gave this whole channel its name. In a Depression-era household, Nothing was thrown away while it could still be saved, and children were never spectators to that. They were apprentices to it, pulled up close to the work until it became theirs. There was no toss it out and buy new reflex in these homes, because there was rarely money to buy new and rarely a store that mattered more than the sewing basket sitting beside the chair. Clothes were mended at the elbow and knee. Socks were darned over a wooden egg by lamplight. Shoes were resoled instead of discarded. Holes were patched, and worn-out fabric never went into the trash. It was cut into squares for a quilt, braided into rugs, or cannibalized down to its last usable thread to patch and save something else. New cloth was such a genuine luxury that flour and feed companies caught on and began printing their sacks in pretty cotton patterns, precisely because they knew mothers were sewing their children's clothes straight out of the packaging. And children learned all of it the only way these skills have ever truly been learned, by sitting shoulder to shoulder with someone doing it, hands in the work, watching and failing and trying again until the skill lived in their own fingers instead of in a memory of being told. A child who could darn a sock, resole a shoe, or patch a coat by the age of 10 was not completing a quaint craft project for a grade. That child was becoming genuinely, measurably useful to the people around them. And usefulness, it turns out, is its own quiet species of confidence. A kid who knows how to fix things knows something about themselves that no trophy and no amount of praise can ever install from the outside. That when something breaks, they are not helpless. That earned, practical, unglamorous competence is exactly what Make It Last was always about. Now look hard at the reflex we've built in its place. Something tears, something cracks, something stops working. And the modern answer, drilled into children through nothing but repetition, is to replace it. Order another one. The broken thing goes in the bin, and out with it goes the entire experience of ever having learned to save it. We didn't merely lose the skills themselves. We are raising children who never once discover that a broken thing can be the beginning of something instead of the end of it. You can bring the whole thing back with a single broken object. The next time something small tears or snaps in your house, don't quietly replace it while no one's looking. Sit down with a child and fix it together, clumsily, badly if you have to. The wobbly, visible, handmade repair teaches a child more about their own capability than the flawless replacement ever could. Let's slow down for a second because we've covered a lot of ground. The paper route, the baby on the hip, the garden plot, the work papers, the real chores, the coins on the table, the mended sock. And if you're a parent listening to this, I know what might be creeping in right now. So let me say it plainly. None of this is a verdict on you. You didn't invent the comfortable world your kids are growing up in. You inherited it, same as they did. What we're really doing here isn't handing out blame. We're trying to remember something our own families knew and quietly, without anyone deciding it. Let's slip away. 2 more habits. And this next one is the hardest to talk about honestly. Here's the uncomfortable truth at the center of this whole story. What built those children wasn't the work itself. It was the fact that the work had consequences that nobody stepped in to erase. When a Depression-era child forgot to feed the chickens went hungry, and everyone knew whose job it had been. When a child was careless with a tool the family couldn't afford to replace, the tool stayed broken, and the loss was real and visible and shared. When money got lost on the way home from the market, dinner got smaller, not as a punishment someone invented, but as a simple, unavoidable fact of a world with no slack in it. The lesson didn't come from a lecture. It came from reality, doing what reality does when you drop something that matters. That's the ingredient we've quietly engineered out of childhood, and we did it with the best of intentions. The modern parenting instinct, and it comes from love, real love, is to soften every landing, to catch the falling thing before it hits, to make sure the forgotten homework gets driven to school, the missed deadline gets an extension, the mistake gets smoothed over before it can cost anything. But a consequence that never lands is a lesson that never teaches. And a childhood with every sharp edge padded produces an adult who has never once felt the floor and doesn't quite trust that they can get up off it. This is where we have to be careful, because let them face consequences can curdle into cruelty if you're not paying attention, and that is emphatically not what this is. The Depression didn't build character by being harsh. It built character by being honest, by letting small, survivable failures actually happen while the stakes were still small and survivable. That's the gift hiding inside the hardship, and you can give it deliberately, gently, without any hardship at all. Pick one thing, age-appropriate and genuinely safe, and let the consequence stand. The forgotten lunch, the unwatered plant, the money spent too fast. Resist the every cell in your body screaming to rescue it, and let a small, safe failure do the teaching you never could. One more breath, because the last habit is the one that flips everything you'd expect. We tend to assume that Depression-era kids worked instead of learning, that responsibility came at the cost of school. But for a great many families, the truth ran the other way. School was the privilege that work made possible, and children knew it in their bones. In hard-hit regions, especially the rural South, public schools were starved for money. Buildings falling apart, terms cut short, one exhausted teacher stretched across every grade in a single room. Many rural schools closed outright during the worst years, leaving children without a classroom to go to at all. When a family managed to keep a child in school anyway, everyone understood the arithmetic underneath it. That child's education was being paid for by someone else's labor. An older sibling in a factory, a father on a work crew, a mother taking in wash. Staying in school wasn't a right that arrived automatically every September. It was something the whole family sacrificed to protect, and the child sitting at that desk carried the weight of that sacrifice with them. That weight did something. A child who understands that their education cost their family something tends to treat it as precious, not as a chore to be endured, not as a place they're simply deposited each morning, but as an opportunity someone bled for. The responsibility wasn't only in the work. It was in knowing what the learning had cost and honoring it. Now hold that against the modern relationship to school, where education is so guaranteed, so frictionless, so utterly assumed, that it can quietly curdle into something a child feels entitled to resent. We made school free and universal, a genuine, hard-won triumph that nobody should ever wish away. But somewhere in making it effortless to receive, we accidentally made it easy to take for granted. You can restore the sense of value without restoring a single ounce of the scarcity. Talk openly with a child about what their opportunities actually cost, your hours, your work, the sacrifices stacked quietly behind their ordinary Tuesday. Let them see the price tag, and the privilege starts to feel like one again. We've walked through 9 habits from a world of scarcity. Now let's name what filled the space where they used to be, because something did. Somewhere in the decades after the Depression, as America grew safer and richer and more comfortable than any society in human history, a new instinct took hold in how we raised children. The instinct was to protect, to encourage, to affirm, to make sure no child ever felt the sting of coming up short. And so we handed every kid on the field a trophy, whether they won or lost, whether they tried or didn't. The gesture came from kindness, but the message underneath, it was quietly corrosive. That reward is disconnected from effort, that showing up is the same as succeeding, that the outcome doesn't really depend on you. We don't have to guess at where that leads, because researchers have measured it. Paul Harvey, a management professor at the University of New Hampshire, has studied what he calls psychological entitlement in the workplace, and his research found that younger workers scored measurably higher on entitlement than older generations. In practical terms, Harvey has described managers reporting employees with unrealistic expectations and a strong resistance to accepting any feedback that isn't praise. He's tied that entitlement to a self-serving pattern of thinking, taking the credit when things go well, assigning the blame elsewhere when they don't, and found that people wired that way tend to be less satisfied in their jobs and more prone to conflict with the people they work for. Now, we have to be honest and careful with a finding like that because it's a comparison, not a courtroom verdict, and it is absolutely not a license to sneer at an entire generation of young people. Every generation gets accused of being soft by the one before it. That's an old and tired song. And the young people themselves didn't design the trophy, didn't write the parenting trend, didn't choose the comfortable world handed to them. This isn't about blaming kids. It's about noticing a pattern in the culture that raised them, a pattern where we systematically remove the responsibility, remove the consequence, remove the honest feedback, and then acted surprised when the result was a generation that never got the chance to build those muscles. Because that's the through line under all 10 of these habits, isn't it? The Depression didn't hand children participation trophies. It handed them participation, real, weighted, consequential participation in the survival of the people they loved. And the sign on the thumbnail that brought you here, an no participation trophy, was never really an insult aimed at anyone. It's a description of a world where children were trusted with something real and quietly grew tall enough to carry it. The modern antidote isn't to take away encouragement. Encouragement is good, and children need it. The antidote is to stop letting encouragement stand in for the real thing. Praise the effort, yes, but also let the effort actually matter. Let the win be earned and the loss be felt. Give a child something real to participate in, and you'll find you never needed the plastic trophy in the first place. Take one last breath with me, because it's time to bring all of this home. And I promise you, the ending isn't the one you're bracing for. So here we are at the end of 10 habits, and I told you the ending wouldn't be the one you're bracing for. So let me be clear about what I'm not saying. I'm not saying we should go back to 1932. I'm not saying childhood should be hard, or that scarcity was good, or that there was anything noble about a family not having enough to eat. The Depression was a tragedy. The hunger was real, the fear was real, and the children who lived through it carried things no child should ever have to carry. We are not mourning the loss of poverty. Let's be completely honest about that. What we're mourning is subtler, and it's ours. Somewhere in the long, good work of making childhood safer and softer and more comfortable. Work we should be proud of, we quietly threw out something we didn't mean to lose. We didn't just protect our children from hardship. We protected them from responsibility, from consequence, from the particular, unshakable confidence that comes from being genuinely needed and rising to meet it. We meant to give them an easier life. We accidentally took away some of the very things that build a strong one. And maybe the answer was never to bring back the hardship. Maybe it's simpler and kinder than that. Maybe we don't need to go back to 1935. We just need to stop throwing quite so much away. Not the food, not the money. The trust. The small, real responsibilities. The honest weight we've been so careful to keep off our children's shoulders, when a little of it is exactly what they've been missing. If this stirred something in you, some memory of your own grandmother, your own childhood, something your family knew and you'd half forgotten, do me a favor and hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach other people who feel the same quiet loss. And subscribe, because we're working our way through the habits and the wisdom of a generation that knew how to make things last. And I don't want you to miss where we go next. And if you haven't seen it yet, go watch our last episode, Why Did Marriages Survive the Great Depression When Nothing Else Did? It's the same story from a different angle. How a generation with almost nothing held on to the one thing that mattered most. You'll find it on the screen right now. But before you go, I want to hear from you, and I want you to be specific. Of all 10 of these habits, the paper route, the real chores, the money in real hands, the consequences that landed, the mended sock, which one did your family still practice? Which one got passed down to you? And which one do you wish you'd been given? Tell me in the comments. I read them, and these are the stories this whole channel is really about. Thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next one.